tab on it.
Well, thank you, and welcome back.
Thank you.
As we continue our journey through the 2013 budget, we're going to switch gears to the 2013 through 2015 budget, otherwise known as our three-year budget. We're going to start this conversation with really the core premise that relates to some of the city values. Clearly, Council, has indicated that the core competencies of public safety and infrastructure take precedence over quality of life type services as we allocate funds for those services. It's kind of prioritizing that. Okay? As an overview of our three-year budget, the three-year budget has an allocation of about $4.7 million from general fund balance to maintain the level of operations going forward from 2013 through 15. Again, these reserves that we're going to spend are going towards delaying any reduction of further city services. Capital projects has an allocation of about $7.6 million from fund balance. And again, this is to maintain infrastructure at the current levels that were described to you when we went through the capital project fund for the current year and the 6 subsequent years, or 5 subsequent years. And I don't know why I've got spaces in there. So let's talk about then, what does a three-year budget do? What are some of the qualities? Well, the budget process is really no longer an annual event. Now we're looking at not only this year, but into the future. So again, we're really looking at a budget 3 times before that year comes up, right? Multiple year budgets evolve year-round. Again, as we gain information, and already, just in the week, I get new information every week. And until we pass this budget, I want to make sure that you've got the most up-to-date information that I've got, so that we can make that decision. Again, making a budget involves making reasonable assumptions. We have to be, in my mind, I'm conservative in the estimates that I make, but I think it's a good thing to establish a budget that you can see at the worst case scenario what it would look like into the future, and once we set a budget, we live inside those means. So in other words, we're going to set a budget that is drawing the outside lines. Management stays within those lines as we provide the services that you allocate funds for. Again, we modify the three-year budget as data is available. It is a rolling budget, and I don't see this on here. There it is. It allows a long-term view on functionality of the organization. In other words, we're trying to steer the ship. Let's not be looking down at 1 year. We need to lift our heads and look at really the financial realities based on reasonable assumptions that we're going to be challenges that we're going to be faced with in the future. Okay. The three-year budget really involves budgeting for 5 funds. The 5 funds that we basically receive tax revenues from. These are all governmental fund types, and again, their primary sources are funding through property taxes, and okay, that 4 goes under 14. Let's see, somehow.
We got it.
You got it? As you can see, this is, when we're looking at this for the general fund, really, our assumptions are really modest increases. I'm projecting an increase for 14 of about 1.4%, and in 2015 of about 1.8%. Again, inflation we know is going to be 2 to 2.5%, but I believe in our budget process and through our use of attrition and management that we'll be able to keep our costs down at least somewhat under budget. Can I guarantee it? No. But I believe the budget that we have created here shows some fiscal conservative on management standpoint. Okay? Again, we've got modest increases both for the refuge fund, which we've kind of talked about, the library fund. They basically kind of all follow the same assumptions, and really they're primarily based on what we think inflation is going to do and what we can do to beat that. we were asked to put together estimate on taxable value. It was asked of us, Tom, can you tell me, or really it was Nino, they asked Tom, Tom asked Nino, in what year do you believe that we will be back to the 2008 taxable values? And unfortunately, this thing keeps getting longer every year, but right now we're at 2013 when we would believe we would be back at the same levels that we were in 2008. If we look at this, in our current projections, basically we bottom out in 2017, and then again it's just slight increases. Really your 2013 through 2015 budget, as you will see from a revenue side, is pretty flat, and actually a decrease overall in property taxes.
Before going on, Nino, when you made your estimates, did you make those in conjunction with Oakland County?
Oh yeah, we with Oakland County, with area property managers. I spoke with several of the in-state office building owners and several commercial real estate brokers in order to correlate these numbers. And quite frankly, the county looks to communities like Troy and Farmington Hills and Southfield to help them make their projections. Most of the assessing they do is rural in nature. And I wanted to point one thing out, if I might. And those of you that have been paying attention for the last 2 years, when we initially made this chart up, we projected that we would be back at 2008 levels in 2028. And as you can see from this new chart with the newest projections we have, that goes out another 6 years now before we get back to 2008 levels.
Councilman Teets?
You just answered my own question. Thank you.
Oh, Councilman Slater?
Yeah, what's the reason for that?
Well, there's two reasons. Historically, we haven't even kept up with the inflation rate. The initial chart was based on a 3% increase in taxable value per year. This most recent year was 2.7. We had a 1% increase in the residential class. We actually had a decrease in taxable value overall. The projections are that we won't be able to keep the market up with the inflation rate, so therefore your expenses are going to increase. Your market's not going to keep up with your expenses. We had to extend the years before we could get back to that 2008 level.
What I'm hearing from realtors here in Troy is the market for housing is coming back really quicker than anticipated. The inventory is really low, so housing prices are going up. They stay on the market very short period of time. So I know that a lot of this is contingent upon what happens with commercial and industrial, but in these numbers here, what are we projecting for the housing market? Do you think we're on target here, or we're ahead of the curve or behind the curve? Or?
There's an issue with the residential housing market and the way the State Tax Commission dictates the sales study. And it's been this way since 1962. When you have a decreasing market, they have the assessors use a one-year sales study so that the decrease affects the taxpayer as much as it possibly can. If you have an increasing market, you go to a two-year sales study, which puts less of a burden on the taxpayer. This year, for instance, you've heard 100 different times from us that the residential market went up 1%. That was on a two-year study. Had we still been on a one-year study, the market would have gone up 2%. We lost an entire percent there because they went from a one-year study to a two-year study. And as long as the market is increasing in the residential class, we'll still be on that two-year study. We'll basically be 2 years behind the market. Now on the commercial and in the industrial side of it, we still use the one-year study because those values are falling. So even when they start increasing, they're going to hit us with a two-year study, and we're going to be 2 years behind the market. That's why it's so critical. I mean, it's been great. Quite frankly, the residential market's doing much better than we expected. It's still, in Troy, it's at the mid to lower end of the market. The upper value houses are still not selling well. But yeah, your entry-level houses all the way up to around probably 250, 260, they're doing great. But we're being forced not to track that value by the change in the two-year sales study.
And maybe this graph kind of represents what Nino just said. Again, overall, in total, we have seen in our projecting through at least 17 that in total, there will be a decrease in taxable value. However, the residential has peaked up. Again, we said about a 1% increase for this year, and if that trend continues, maybe 2% for next year.
Maybe another one.
Maybe another one. But unfortunately, we can see commercial and industrial are still on the decline, which is basically pulling our total down overall. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, again, this is a summary, and we'll get into more details on these. But in our millage requirements that we are requesting, we're keeping general fund the same. Again, that was the mission, Tom, keep general fund millage where it's at. Again, our library fund is set at 0.7 mils. Capital fund is remaining unchanged at 1.53 mils. And so, but what we are asking for, and as you can see, is an increase in the refuse rates, and we're going to get, again, into more detail on both this and in the debt service fund, that we're asking for really a 5/100ths of an increase in 13, excuse me, a 9/100ths in 13, which we talked about last week, but in 14, a 5/100ths of a mil increase, and in 15, a 5/100ths of a mil. Let's go 4/100ths of a mil for 14, 5/100ths of a mil in 15, and we'll get more into detail of why we think that's going to be necessary when we talk more about the refuge fund. Again, the debt service fund, because of the decrease in taxable value, we have debt service requirements we have to make. We've been losing fund balance in this fund in the tune of $600,000 to $900,000 a year for the last 2 or 3 years. Basically, what this is trying to do is just get us back on the right ship of generating the revenues required to make the debt service payments that we have. Let's talk about residential property tax requirements and a summary on those. Again, we talked about last week that based on the proposed budget, the average property tax owner with a value of $97,742 will pay $1,042 in property taxes. We're with the millage increase for the refuge fund and the debt service fund, that would be $1,037,000. We're projecting for 14 and $1,052 in 15. Of that $1,037 for 2014, you can see that the assessed, the taxable values basically are going up about $1,000 a year. So if I broke that difference between the 1,024 and the 1,037, which is $13 or 1.2%, $8.80 would come from the millage, and $4.20 would come from the increase in taxable value. Again, in 2015, this is a $15 increase, or 1.4%. Of that, $4.90 is related to the requested millage, and $10 is related to the increase in taxable value of those properties. Mr. Teets.
Yes. So we're looking at the taxable value of the properties in the top line in the green.
Yes.
And what's the projections that we're looking at?
For the average city taxes, based for that value, is in the white underneath the 1,024.
Well, I'm wondering what the projected increase in taxable value is. I mean, as a percent.
It's 1% a year at this point in time is what we're predicting.
Okay.
Right, but residential, that's in total.
No, that's just residential.
Just residential, right.
What was it this year, though?
It was 1%.
Was it?
Yeah,
That's a trailing 2-year, correct?
exactly. We could have picked up 2, but when they made us go to the 2-year study, we lost 1%.
So next year we'll be having the 2% plus, God willing,
Yeah.
4% or
Right.
2% or whatever that number is, correct?
Yes.
So
But
that-
but the net, see, the other issue that you have, though, is that while the conventional residential housing went up, the condominiums dropped. So when you combine those two classes of property together, your overall residential only gets this much, as a supposed to. You could take the housing market, the general single-family housing market, and it's probably 2.5%. The condo market is falling through the floor again, and it's drawing down the average taxable value because we've got maybe 18% of our housing stock is condos.
Right, but am I right that overall it went up 2% last year?
In 1 year, yes.
In 1 year?
In 1 year, yes.
And then next year,
It-
God
well,
willing, it's,
But remember, the cap is on the taxable value, not the assessed. I can raise the assessed value 2 or 3%. You're not going to see this in your budget because it's capped at the inflation rate. That's why we're predicting a 1% change in the average taxable value. The average assessed value may go up 3.5%. But with that inflation rate being there, you don't gain it on the taxable value. That's why those projections are lower than what the actual market is.
and what was the?
It was 2.7 this year, but
2.7.
the year before that, it was 0.997. We had a loss.
If only we knew the
Yeah.
future.
Any questions on this slide? Okay, let's talk about our personnel summary. Again, our largest expense is related to personnel. As you can see, we decreased basically our personnel down to about 3.9 employees per thousand population, which equates to about 319 employees. This is, again, down 29 employees from what we had in 2012, which was down from that year, or from the previous years from that. Again, overall, since our high point, we reduced city staff about 172 full-time employees, or about 35%. Okay, let's talk about general fund revenues and revenue sources. Again, for the big picture, really, we're looking pretty flat. Again, this is revenue before the use of fund balance. Slight decreases, but overall in the big picture, that's a pretty flat scenario. Again, we're loosening taxes, but other services, we're going to look at some modest income. But if we look at it, what are my ways that I can to fight inflation? We know that costs go up. I got to have a revenue source that I can at least try and make the increases in cost due to inflation. And everything that we see on here, I'm not seeing anything that's going to go up the amount of inflation, starting with property taxes, at least not in the short term. They're flat. They're not going up the rate of inflation. Licenses and permits, again, the most part of your licenses and permits are related to building permits, and we have a contractor that takes 75 to 80% of that, right? Grants and contributions, well, this is really our state shared revenue. We know that that's not going up. In fact, the trend of that is gone down since really the beginning of time. Hopefully it doesn't go down much further. But that really doesn't have a chance or a way to generate any revenues to try and fight off inflation. Charges for services, again, we talked about a large part of that's related to our rec costs, right? So every time I've got charge for service really kind of relates to, gee, I had to increase fees to pay for that cost for recreation. So again, there's not a lot of room to increase any of that significantly. Fines and forfeitures, again, they're pretty flat. That's not a big revenue source for us. Interest and rents, the same thing. We know the interest rate isn't going to be going up any time too soon that I can foresee. And your other big thing here is transfers. Well, transfers are just reimbursing the general fund for expenditures. This is primarily your streets, and it's being funded from your major local street funds. So every time I have an increase in here or decrease, means I have an increase or decrease in expenditures. It's even. It's just a reimbursement. So there's no room in any one of these categories that I can see to help. And this is going to be the catchword of the night, is trying to keep up with inflationary costs related to expenditures. We're going to have a hard time winning that fight. But as it stands for 2013, 14, and 15, to match that, again, we're bringing about $50 million in before the use of fund balance. We're budgeting the use of fund balance of about $492,000. Again, this chart here is really to show you two things. And one is that we have a balanced budget for each year, and the amount of fund balance that we're going to have to use each year to balance that budget. Again, we got $50.5 million of that. 492 is the use of fund balance. In year 2014, we generate about $49.5 million in revenues, which is going to require the use of about $1.6 million of fund balance. And in 2015, we got about $49.5 million in revenues, which is going to require the use of about $2.5 million in fund balance to meet basically our expenditures. Again, there's total revenues, 50.5, 51.2, 52.1. Go to the next slide. Of our expenditures, it's the same amount for each year. So again, there is no great increases in any one of these expenditure lines. Really, they're pretty much in line and even below inflation for most of what we're requesting the budget to be. Yes, Mr. Fleming.
Go back. Looking at use of fund balance transfer.
Yes.
Which is basically to balance the budget.
Yes.
We go back 2 years, or go back to last year's budget, we were projecting the 3-year budget and use of general fund balance transfer.
Right.
What were we projecting compared to what we're projecting now?
To what, compared to last year?
Use of fund balance transfer, I don't have that number. Use of fund balance transfer. We were at this point last year, and we were looking at what we were going to have to be using fund balance for. How much we were projecting to use for 2013 and 2014. We hadn't got to 15 yet. So now we're projecting 492 and 1,648. What were we projecting?
Right. I believe that you, for 2013, if I recall, I don't have the 2012 budget in front of me to see what that is. However, do I not have to see what that original budget was?
Because that's what we're estimating it's going to take to balance the revenues with the expenditures.
That's right.
That's what the fund balance,
That's
we all know
exactly
that.
right.
But this is a projection. I'm looking for what our track record has been on these projections of using the fund balance to transfer to balance.
I can make a first response on that.
Okay.
And that is that we're very accurate. I would say 98 to 99% on our revenue projections. That's
Excellent.
thanks to Nino and him working in conjunction with the county, and we're spot on with our revenue projections. A budget, I mean, this budget is not really so much about the expenses, it's about meeting a revenue line. And in good times, when the revenue goes up, it's a very easy job of the city manager and staff, because you have an ability to build the community based upon the values that the mayor and council give us. That's a long answer, but it requires one. So we're very accurate at tracking our revenue lines. And I'm going to go ahead, and I'm going to take a part of my presentation and answer it in advance, if I may.
Okay.
Go to slide 67.
Can I
66, I'm
I'll
sorry.
just answer real quick.
Okay.
Your question was, last year, 2013, you were budgeted to use about 700 and some odd thousand, about 750,000 of fund balance. So,
2014?
in last year's budget, I believe it was 700 and some odd thousand. We're at 492. So,
Page 65, I think. May I?
page 65.
2000.
Sure.
And I'll just stand up there.
And
I'm
There you
going
go.
to take 3 or 4 slides, give Tom a little bit of a break. And in addition, when you hire a new city manager, one question you want to ask him or her is who does all the crummy jobs in the organization, and the response is the manager does. That's another reason why the next few slides are mine. But the good side is I'll only be about one-third as long as Bill Rudy. Talk about the ASR. But you want to take a look at essentially where we were from an historical perspective. And the x-axis, or the one that goes up and down, is money, and the y-axis, or the one that goes sideways, is time. And where we were in 6, 7, and 8, take a look at 6, 7, and 8,
Yeah.
is that we had a revenue line, or I'm sorry, we had an expenditure line that was higher than our revenues in actuality.
So we're
Okay?
using fund balance.
So we had to use fund balance in those 3 years. Whenever the red line, the expense line is higher than the revenue line, the area in between there is the use of fund balance because we have to balance the budget. All right? And then it was essentially in 2010, it was a race to the bottom because we had a severely declining revenue line, and we were very accurate in that revenue line. And we went to city council at that point in time and said, you know what? If we don't modify this expenditure line, assuming we stay business as usual, we're going to be bankrupt in about 2 or 3 years. So what we had to do was restructure the entire organization to match a declining revenue line, of which we're about 99% accurate on. Okay. What we did was some pretty bad things and some pretty good things. The bad thing is that we had to reduce the workforce by over 35%. The good things are that those people that were left agreed to concessions, every employee group over 10%, and we also engaged in best practices, which included privatization, regionalization, consolidation. By doing that, essentially, we actually did better in the years that we're currently in. We beat the revenue line. And so we were able to add to our fund balance. But in projecting out, we did not know at a particular point how many people we were going to have to eliminate. We did not know how many employee groups would open up their labor contracts and give us concessions. We did not know if the early retirement incentive program was going to be functional in terms of cost efficiency and effectiveness. We did not know if it was going to be more cost effective and efficient to privatize the entire building department and go to a hybrid system for the engineering department and the planning department. We now know these things. So again, we were able to add to our fund balance. Okay? And Tom, I don't want to mess up your great presentation, but if I can roll on this for the next few slides.
You're on a roll.
We can talk about what's going on essentially in the future. What I did, and this is thanks primarily to the discussions. Yes.
If you could just go back to that slide for a
All right.
second. The line down at the bottom is for unassigned fund balance, correct?
Right.
So that's kind of, I think, what Councilman Fleming was talking about. If you notice at 12, it peaks at wherever, my recollection on the prediction from the formal budget was fairly close. My recollection for 13.
Yes,
Yeah, 13 and 14.
Right.
13.
It essentially, it peaks at 12, and that's because we went, if you go on this chart, from having a look if we didn't do anything of expenditures greater than revenues to doing all those things that made us lean, and so we were able to actually add back to the fund balance $1.9 million. And that generated a great discussion at the council table about what should we do with the fund balance. It is people's money. And we had to take a look essentially at, can I change slides now? Okay. At not only a 3-year budget, but a 5-year projection. So our budget essentially ends, our current budget ends at 6/30/12. And I had some very simple categories up here. Just take a look at the unassigned fund balance to avoid all the clutter. So at the end of 2012, we're going to add $1.9 million to that fund balance. And the remaining unassigned fund balance is $17 million, 34.45%. Okay. Then we have a 3-year budget, and we want to take the long view of a 3-year budget. So in 2013, we're going to have to take money from the general fund, unassigned fund balance, to balance our budget. And that brings us down to $14 million. It's more than just a simple mathematical calculation because there's other funds and there's also assigned fund balance that's being used at various points in time too. So then at 6/30/13, we're at 29% of fund balance. The second year in our budget, 2014, we've got to use $1.6 million of fund balance that's unassigned, and we're down to $12 million, or 24% of our unassigned fund balance. And again, please know that we're about 98, 99% accurate in our revenues. And as Tom indicated, our expenditure line, we're not hiring any new employees. We're just trying to keep up with the inflationary costs that we have, and we're not keeping up with inflation. Our third year of the budget, 2015, essentially is utilizing $2.5 million of fund balance. We're down to 15%. And we talked about at our last meeting what to do with the fund balance, and agreed that we need to take a look not only at our 3-year budget, but our 5-year forecast on what's going to happen, because you don't want to be in a position, and I've done this, so I'm speaking from experience, the worst thing you can do, aside from laying someone off that's been a long-time employee, is hire somebody that's gainfully employed somewhere else and lay him off 2 years later. That's worse. In 2016, we're going to utilize $3.7 million of our unassigned fund balance. We're going to be at $2,900,000. Now, forgetting about percentages and what GFOA says is a minimum standard of 11 to 17%, I personally believe that if you go below $4 or $5 million in the city of Troy, with all of the possibilities of having Big Beaver implode, having a tornado come in here, you're essentially unsustainable in 2016. In 2017, again, given our accurate revenue line projections, hiring no additional increase in personnel, but just having essentially a cost of living or inflationary increase in the budget document, we're going to be utilizing $4.7 million of unassigned fund balance, but that's more money than what we have. So at that point, the new challenge becomes, how do you avoid a possible takeover by the state of Michigan through a financial manager? Because that needs to be determined. So again, I don't want to be doom and gloom here. Thanks to our employees and the city council that prioritized service delivery venues, we went from tanking in about 2011-12. We bought 6 more years, hoping the economy would pick up. You now have our projections. It's going to be a tough road. You can adopt a 3-year budget, you're going to be fine. But you have to take a look to the future to say, what are we going to do after that? Those are your challenges that you have to face with the great staff that you have and the new city manager, or maybe 2017, 2 or 3 managers from now. That's up to you folks. That's what you're going to have to take a look at. And if you mind if I keep rolling, Tom? Okay. All right. My apologies, Thomas. You can't have an... Oh, what happened here? You can't have a negative fund balance. The state won't allow it. So the question becomes, and Mr. Slater asked this question, is what if we decided to open up the library and not have a millage increase? If you opened up the library without a millage increase, what would have happened based on the $3 million that we would cost every year? The red line becomes our fund balance in millions of dollars, and as you can see with our original budget, when we're unsustainable, just shy of 2017, we become unsustainable between year 14 and 15. What that would have meant is that you could have adopted a 1-year budget and been okay, but you'd have been bankrupt if you had adopted a 2-year budget. You would not have been allowed to adopt a 2-year budget. You would not have been allowed to adopt a 3-year budget because you can't adopt a budget in deficit. So that's an answer to that question. You could not have had a library without a millage increase, unless you laid off 30 more police officers. That's the only department that's left to lay off. Then we asked, or we were asked, what would happen if we put back furlough time in the police department, if we put back furlough time in the police department and had classified exempt employees, if we had 2 more police officers in the school. The short answer is, you really don't want to do that, because there's no money in the out years. Questions? Yes, sir.
Can we go back to 2012 projected fund balance? We said 2013 we projected use of fund balance transfer at $750,000. When we went back to 2012, just last year's budget, what was our projected fund balance usage?
That
Transfer.
I'll have to refer to Mr. Darling.
That's what I'm looking for, the 2,000, I'm looking at our track record on use of fund balances. I know we've done some drastic things, but revenue, we're good at estimating. Our expenses, we're conservative budgeters here, and rightfully so.
Right.
So I'm not really, don't have issue with the revenue, although I do think the housing market's going to recover, and we're going to have more revenue than we're anticipating now, but let's say the revenues are right. I think budgeting, as a general rule, our expenditures, we've been very conservative. By that I mean we've budgeted more expenditures than we're incurring. So we generally, from year to year, based on the budget the last few years, we're using less fund balance transfer than what we had budgeted. So if I'm asking the question, 2012, 2013, 2014, what was our fund balance budget transfer?
We can find that answer, but again, that's a numerical answer,
Yes.
and you need to take a look at the reality that we experienced with a very accurate revenue line and a series of scenarios or futures if we didn't do something to control our expenditures. A lot of cities, what they'll do is they'll take other actions to match the decline in revenue line. We said we have no other actions. All we have to do is cut expenditures. And so we had projections. We couldn't budget on an if-come. I could not guarantee that the Command Officers Association, the Police Officers Association would open up their contracts and take a concession. So we didn't know that until we actually inked a deal. We had 4 other unions that we had no idea what they were going to do. And so you're right, Mr. Fleming, we budget our expenditures conservatively. But when you take a look at what we've done in the past, I like to say that we've already hunted all the elephants, and all we have left now to hunt are rabbits. And so you really can't look to employees, in my opinion. I'm walking out the door. I can be a little more candid than if I was 40 years old and had to work here again for 5 more years. But I think that's of a benefit to you as well. All of the major cuts that we could make are made. We didn't know that we could make these major cuts when we fashioned out our initial expenditure line, but we knew that we had to make those cuts. And when you cut the workforce 35%, you really can't cut the workforce anymore in accordance with our ICMA study. In fact, and I'll take responsibility, I cut so many people that I had to put back people in the police department and public works, otherwise you were going to be unsustainable. So you can't look to cut people. If you want to look at taking more concessions, we can't find people to fill positions that we have vacant right now. So if one of your objectives is to attract and retain talented, quality employees, I can attract and retain marginal, untalented employees all day long. It's a matter of what kind of workforce you want to have here. So essentially, from my perspective, you can't lay off people because you'll be unsustainable. You really don't want to take any more concessions because I know we're ahead of the curve in our surrounding areas, and I can't import people and compete globally. I've got to hire people that probably live within 25 miles or are willing to move here to work here. So the personnel matters are off the table. You don't want to have a millage increase. So essentially, what's left is you have to meet a declining revenue line, and so I can show you what we anticipated for in use of fund balance, and we beat it. Thanks to our employees. And with all due respect, the number doesn't have any validity because it was a projection that we had to match a declining revenue line. We didn't know how we were going to achieve it, so we had to use fund balance. And then when the police department says, John, we'll open up our contracts, we'll give you 10%. If that was $500,000, we were able to reduce our reliance on fund balance by $500,000. That's why we'll give you the numbers, but the actions taken subsequent to that number is what you need to take a look at.
Yeah, and I agree with you, but I think going forward too, what we have to focus on are expenditures. I know we've done a lot, but I think we still have to focus on that because we don't know what's going to happen. We have to continue to be conservative.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think it's a good move just to say we're going to take it out of fund balance. I don't think we can do that every year. We have to budget conservative, but we have to look at anywhere we can to reduce expenditures. If we can't get the revenues up, or either we've got to get more grants and so forth where we can use money, so we've got, and that's an area where we really need to focus on.
But as manager, I'm required to balance a budget, to present a balanced budget. And I can't say, you know what, we're going to, TPOA is going to open up its contract 3 years in advance, and so I'm going to just reduce their personnel costs by X number of dollars. And then when they tell me to get lost, the money's got to come out of fund balance to balance it. But again, it's your budget. I present a budget that's balanced. You can modify it, but you also have to present a balanced budget to the state of Michigan. Okay? So if I may, and this is pretty heavy stuff. That's why we're meeting tomorrow, because by the time we're done with the presentation, it's going to be after 10 o'clock. It'd be great if we could essentially take all your questions. And I'm not going to be able to go back and beat up staff tomorrow at 10 o'clock, 12 hours from now to give me answers. But we'll know and be prepared to discuss and answer any questions you have, because our job is to give you a comfort level. In making decisions, the only thing that I wanted to point out is that because of the good practices and the good partnership that we have with the council manager form of government, we were able to save this organization for 6 years. I mean, take a look at what's going to happen in some other cities around here, and it's horrible. But you have a huge challenge, and that challenge is to essentially do what you can to keep the state of Michigan from coming in here. We're already on their watch list.
I'm sorry. The reforms made last year obviously affect this year's request. I assume we're not going to sit on our hands for the coming year and look for areas to kill plenty of rabbits. And so that will affect 2014, 15. I mean, a 3-year budget's good, but it's a rolling budget. And I guess that's to dovetail with what Councilman Fleming's saying is, you know, we were off by 300,000 because there are a lot of reforms made. And I would think that our goal would be to have other reforms made. So 2014, the numbers are wrong. And I think slide 16 or 62, you know, I appreciate the slide you're looking at, but I mean, slide 62 really, I mean, what is the number that was projected for 2012 for year 14? Because I think it does matter. I mean, it just shows that the reforms made this year affect the third year. And I guess in 2013, we're going to be finding other reforms. I mean, right?
The one thing I want to point out, though, too, is that you're looking at things in a 3-year budget, not a 1-year budget. So it wasn't like these reforms that we came up with and they went into effect in 2012.
That's right.
I mean, these were reforms that we were talking about on the first day that I sat on council that finally came to fruition after, you know, 2+ years of work, because we're talking about contracts and we're talking about restructuring the way that departments are running and providing services. So if we want to talk about these numbers not being quite right, which I agree with you, there's definitely going to be room to make improvements. But we've just completed 2.5 years worth of work to make those changes. Right now, we have a city manager that's leaving. We're going to spend 3 months trying to find the perfect candidate to come in there. And we're not talking about anything right now, huge structural changes. So if we do come up with these ideas in the midst of hiring a new city manager, you know, it's going to take us more than a year to realize it, too. So I think looking at it and saying that next year's budget is not going to be right, I might agree with that, but I don't see anything on the horizon that's big enough to make changes that I would feel comfortable, you know, really going out on a limb with the fund balance, I guess. That's my point of view, just seeing how the process takes time.
If I may, and I'm not going to diss any cities by name, but there is a plethora of municipalities that would take a budget and they would stop at 2013. And you would look at 1 year's budget and they would go, yahoo, we added $1.9 million to our budget. Let's hire 10 more police officers. We got the money. And the only thing I'm trying to do, I mean, is to let you know that looking forward, you have a challenge. you have a huge challenge looking forward. And it doesn't matter what your fund balance projection was, because if we did nothing, if we were not as competent as we are as a management team, we would have been very accurate with the fund balance. But we didn't not do nothing. We reduced the workforce by 1/3. We took employee concessions. We engaged in best practices. And so when you look out in the future, I can't guarantee, any manager cannot guarantee you that these best practices are going to save this money. You have to budget for what is. So actually, it's a tribute to the management of the city by saying we allocated this much money for fund balance, but instead it came out of our employees' pockets.
It's a good situation. I
Yes.
absolutely agree with you.
All right. And it's not my intent to make anybody uncomfortable. You needed to see this. A job of a manager is to let the community know what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. I'm not here to satisfy a predetermined ideology. I'm not here to indicate that things are great. Okay? I am here to say that we have a great staff, and thanks to the staff, they saved this organization with the help of City Council for 6 years. And that's oftentimes 6 more years than other municipalities have. This is something that you have to address. You can put it off, but it's still there. And if I may, yes, sir.
Yeah, before you leave, this is the exact same scenario that we walked into 2 years ago, basically. And I just think it's going to help everybody that's in this room to show what Councilman Fleming, I think, is trying to say here, in that we made some projections 2 years ago, the exact same way that we did tonight. I think we need to see that document to show people this is what we were projecting 2 years ago. This is what the first year was going to be. This was going to be the second year, the third year, the fourth year. We need to see the same document that we're seeing tonight, because there's a presumption, I think, in this room that it's drastically different, okay? But I was here 2 years ago. I remember what I saw, and the projections were very similar, if not exact. What changed, and I think Mr. Darling probably has the document, what changed is some of the unknowns that were projected became knowns. Right. Okay? And that allowed us to change a year ahead of time, okay? So you are going to see a difference in the document that was shown to us 2 years ago, and that's because 1.9 was not, we didn't know what that number was going to be, okay? But let's say it's $1 million off every year, okay? When you get to 16, it's still going to be really bad, okay? Even if you want to throw $1 million, which I don't think you can do, but if you want to, it's still going to be really bad in 16. So once we get that document, I think it may be able to satisfy some people in this room to show the predictions were very similar. We're 1 year ahead, is basically what happened here. And I just think I got a little upset last time we talked, because some people were talking about putting $1 million back in the police budget. We were talking about adding police officers. We were talking about doing what a lot of other communities are doing when they get a $1.9 million fund balance transfer in. And we have to look at the future, what I said last time. It's our obligation to look at the future of Troy. Not look at it in 12, 13, 14, 15, but you have to do what we did 2 years ago. And that's what you have to look 5 years out. And when you look at 5 years out, it's not good.
If we don't do anything.
If we don't do anything.
That's right. And that's the important note.
On both ends.
That's right.
On both ends.
And that's
On both ends.
is a big asterisk. Because if we don't do anything, we're up a creek without a
On
paddle.
both ends.
That's right.
Do you have those numbers, Manager Zerle?
I'm sorry?
Do you have those numbers from last year's
Uh,
or 2 years ago budget?
I should have looked at it.
If it's not available tonight, we're coming
Well, get
back
it
tomorrow.
tomorrow night, John.
Tomorrow,
Okay.
you know, I mean,
Okay, because I can look it up myself.
All right,
yeah, we could all look it up
Okay.
ourselves, but I think
Well-
there's an atmosphere in this room here that thinks, but it's explainable. It's explainable. Okay.
Explainable portion is, we have to do something. And we had to do something last year, the year before, and we did. As a result, we're much better off than what the scenario would have been, so we had to do something. We have to do something the next couple of years as well. You can't just let this deteriorate.
And the intent here is not to scare anybody. I'm just going to let you know this is a challenge that needs to be addressed.
Have to do something.
And if we would have not had the library millage, we'd be worse off this year, next year, and the year after. And that's the simple truth.
The library would be closed if we didn't have the millage.
The library would have been closed, but there were some people that were telling us that there was money there without a millage.
Yeah, I know. I was wondering.
That's correct.
And I think
And that's not true.
I think we're right.
Well, may I give this over back to Mr. Darling? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think, that's well noted. I think the point is that there is work to be done out there. That right now, we're in an unsustainable level, right? We talked about revenues, there's not really room in our revenues to match inflation. So it's just a matter of time before, unless you do something to really change one or the other, right? Revenues or expenditures to do that. Now, we taught, and we'll get back with you on what the projections were, but in 2012, really the thing is I think John articulated it correctly. It was a race to the bottom, right? And really, we were able to cut our expenditures a year ahead of what we thought we would. And how does that show its face? It shows its face as fund balance.
Exactly.
Right? But now that we've hit the bottom, okay, expenditures, we like consistency as accountants, right? Because it's easier to project. The expenditures are zero-based budgeted on 319 employees. In other words, the cuts that we were looking at here, which are hard to budget because you don't know how many it's going to take an ERIT program or not. Now that we've hit the bottom, I don't think that we're going to be that far off, based on inflation. Based on the current levels of service that we're providing now, projected out, that's what it would look like. So at the end of the day, you're right. We got to do something then. There will be a change in the level of service or some other expenditure or other type of thing to make that balance out. But you're right. We can't keep up with inflation, and that's exactly what that's showing right there. Being projected out, okay? Okay, so we talked earlier about fund balance and what's assigned, unassigned, and that thing keeps going back and forth. I think last time we were here, we had about 11.9 million of unassigned. Well, in total, we have not changed our budget. Again, the use in 2013 of about 492,000, the 1.6 for 14, and the 2.5 for 15 in totals. Those have not changed. What we did go back and look at is because Nino gave me really some good news last week, and that was in our reserves. And with inside it, you've always had a trend of about 2.2 to 2.5 million of tax refunds that we would reserve every year. Well, as you can see in the budget, we've had some major expenditures and budgeted for those expenditures. When Nino brought back a document said that, you know what, you don't need that much in reserves for basically 13, 14, and 15. So I went back and did this. In fact, you guys got that document. I think it was part of Councilman Henderson's questions on what makes all the different things that go up, make that up. So, but let's not get lost in the percentages. I mean, we're still talking real dollars. Unassigned fund balance, again, from 12 to 13, is going to go down about 2 million. You're going to lose another 3 million going into 14, and into 15, another 4 million. And why is that? The big things that go from unassigned to assigned is what you're budgeting for the next year's budget. In other words, you can only appropriate it once, you can't appropriate it twice, right? So what's incorporated in this unassigned fund balance is the usage of 2.5 million of funds for the next year. So that decreases the available unassigned at the end of the day. I don't know if I explained that or not, but you have to account for what you're appropriating for the next year's budget. You have to count at the end of this current fiscal year. In other words, if you committed or assigned,
Repeat that.
If you committed or assigned,
The critical issue is like, when you're using the fund balance this year, all of a sudden, it becomes a reserved amount the next year. It's not unreserved anymore. That's why when you looked at that chart that Tom had up there, and you saw the unreserved dropping from, it dropped like $6 million, but you only used 2.9 million, well, you were appropriating 3 million for the next year. So that money no longer is unreserved. You've reserved it to cover your next year's budget.
Right.
And that's a critical issue.
that's why I say here's the decrease in total, but it's a significantly sharper decrease when it comes to unassigned fund balance. Okay? But basically, at the end of the day, even with that reassignment, we still came to, at 2015, to have about just over 15%. So we just got there in a different route from what I gave you last week. But it's still, as a percentage of fund balance, $8 million, it's going to be about 15%. Okay? Any more on the general fund before I go into the refuse and recycling? Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm
yes.
always slow to raise my hand. What actually is the annual police officer in the school cost? I can see a graph, but I can't.
I believe it was about 180,000 for two. For two, right?
Two officers,
Yeah.
full-time in the schools, 180,000. What was the actual marginal cost for the furloughed PD? I'm looking at slide 68.
Oh, let's see here. I can find out what the actual dollars were.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. If I have that, I may have to go look for that. Should have done that. Can I get that to you tomorrow? I mean, I've got that. It's about,
I trust you.
I think it was like 400 to 500,000 for PO, and then about 800,000 for PO and CE, and then it was $1 million and something for everybody. But again, I don't like talking in round numbers, so I just didn't get you the specifics. If that'll work for you. But I think what's, here's the thing, is you can see that in year one, there's not a big difference, right? But each year, it gets wider and wider, and the point is, it's an annuity. So 500,000, it's 500,000 in 1 year, that, especially with a declining revenue base, right? And then I'm using fund balance. 1 year, I'm using $1 million, or 500,000. Year two, I've used $1 million. Year three, I've used $1.5 million. I mean, it's significant. It's an annuity. So those type of decisions are compounded.
Sure.
Yes.
Could you go back again, please, to the furlough issue?
Furlough issue? Sure.
Some of the contracts expired before 16,
Yes.
and furlough issues only are during contracts, correct?
Correct.
So some, if not all of that, could change in a couple of years. There could be no more furlough days, there could be changes in many things, so I think that's a good thing to look at, but a lot could change between now and 17, as far as furlough days, Some of the contracts expire in 13, I believe.
That's right, 13, some of
Yeah.
them.
Some of them 13, some 14, some 15,
Right.
some 16.
And so,
So that's out there.
So
There will be-
that issue is out there as well. It could change it in either direction.
Councilman Teets, furlough days for the police department is about 493,000. Police department and certified and exempt is 845,000. And furlough for all employees would be $1,097,000 a year. And then, of course, you can compound that annually. Any other questions related to furlough, general fund? Okay, refuse and recycling, again, for the 3-year budget. Again, as you noted, we were projecting millage increases to help fund, or at least get this refuge fund back up to probably the level that it should be. Again, 2013 had a 900ths of a mil proposed, 400ths of a mil for 14, and 500ths of a mil for 15, to generate basically these revenues of about 200,000 additional a year. Again, expenditures, again, these are related. Remember, this is all contracted for the most part, and all the contracts have an inflation and fuel accelerator. There's our contractor services. We're expecting expenditures again. Even with this increase, we're hoping to really add to fund balance of about 57,000 for 13, 17,000 for 14, and 25,000 for 15. And the reason that we're thinking that we should probably add to this fund balance is because really we've driven this fund down. That I'm not sure if we're going to make it through 2012 or not. Right now, my projection is about $2,000. Well, that's not much to hang your hat on. Again, the idea is to slowly bring this fund balance for this fund back up to something that really would be sustainable. The purple line is 10% of expenditures, and I would think that would be reasonable for a fund like this. The reason that we've had this, as you can see, for several years, we've had expenditures in excess of the revenues, which drove down the fund balance, because you're using fund balance to fund the operations. Yeah. Next, let's talk about the library fund. Again, tax revenues at the 0.7 mils are really basically flat. They are declining slightly, but for the most part flat. Again, you can see that in the total revenues, because there really isn't, we don't expect grants or contributions or fines and forfeitures. This is really provided by the state for the most part to increase anywhere significantly. In 2013, we're looking to, for revenues in excess of expenditures of about 95,000, in 14, 49,000, and that's about 3,600 in 15. Okay? And again, the idea is that this is a new fund. It really doesn't have much fund balance, and I think we're going to get about 300,000 for 13 or for 12. But the idea is to get at some level rate, and then going forward, we would appropriate the funds that it generates for its operations. Debt service fund, again, really what you're seeing here is 100 for 2013, based on the decline in the millage and the rates. We would still be using about 172,000 in fund balance. That's what that transfer is to basically balance the budget. Again, we've been dropping $600, $800 darn near to $1 million a year out of fund balance because of shortfalls. Our expenditures have been greater than the tax revenues generated. All we're trying to do is right the ship with those proposed millage increases. Again, we're just kind of coming out even about 58,000 for 14 and 10,000 for 15. Keep in mind we used another 172 right in 13. So, and at the end of the day, the debt service required will equal the payments that we have to make. We're required to make these. It's kind of the long view, and all we're trying to do is match the revenue sources again with the debt service requirements over time. Capital Project Fund, 3-year budget. Again, revenues. This is going to show you a couple things. Again, that we can budget revenues to equal expenditures. However, to do that, we're going to be using about $2.5 million a year in fund balance, and that probably is not going to last forever. Based on our tax mill of 1.53%, again, our tax revenues are about $1.5 million a year. This grant right here is basically primarily this transit center at about $6.3 million. Of that, that's $6,272,500 of that.
That's right.
Bring 'em in.
So again, we do have a balanced budget, but again, it's using $2.5 million of fund balance to do that, and so that scenario is not going to play out forever. Again, here's the expenditures, which we really went through for the most part for drains. In great detail before. We talked about the library. These are really books and audio-visual equipment to give supplies. There we go. And self-checkout here has that, but these are really materials in 14 and 15. What else is noteworthy on here? Again, they're pretty consistent for the non-stuff across. Of course, by contract we have to do the museum. We're just trying to kind of flatten out our expenditures in that case. Here are the major things, major roads. Again, 3.7 for 13, 3.2 for 14, and about 5.1 for 15. And again, we went through this a little bit prior when we were talking about the capital project funds for both. For all major roads, public works, and sidewalks. Transfers, again, that's for the IT department, that's reimbursement. But as you can see, the $17.9 million, the difference between this and the $11.5 million is primarily the transit center. At that point, again, the capital project is really to kind of maintains our roads and drains, local streets, and sidewalks for the most part. Keep that on a consistent road. Finally, what are the things going forward that we really haven't talked about, really incorporated into the budget? One is the personal property tax issue, and again, we're pretty sure that's going to happen. We're not sure how much that will be supplanted, I guess, by the state. Nino just told me no matter what, I'm going to take a 2% hit right off the top. Is that correct, Nino?
Yeah, the current legislation recalls for no reimbursement until there's a 2% budget drop from the loss in personal property tax revenue. So whatever happens, you're going to lose 2%. The upside to that is that probably won't happen until 2016. We're looking at maybe 1% the first year, which would be the next year's budget, this current one you're working at. 1.5% the year after that, and then the full 2% in 16.
Thanks, Neil. Next, the DDA. Obviously, we know there's some issues out there. We're still negotiating with that and trying, but that's still hanging out there. There may be something that this council may decide that it wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, again, attraction and retention of quality employees. As we can see, we're trying to beat inflation. And we're going to have a hard time doing that. We may be doing different things to set different service levels, different compensation packages, or what we have to do basically to claw and bite and kick and and try and keep us with inside our revenue line items, sources. And then, any questions for me? Who has the first question? Other than, when are you going to sit down?
I have a question for John, unless you got a question for me.
Question.
Yes. Councilman Fleming.
Good job. On chart, on page 76, the federal and state grants, we alluded to this a little bit tonight. I know that's
Yeah.
the transit center. Is there anything we're working on for 2014 or 15 or beyond for grants that
Excellent question.
forecasts? We must have something.
We do have federal grants coming in for the first phase of John R. And that's why there's the blip from the 3 to the 5 in majors, because that's 14, 15 is when we are anticipating funding for that next phase of John R.
Which would be in the 16, it's later in the 15 year. That would affect 16.
It'd be 14, it'd be 15 actually, because I've got it shown in the 14, 15 number.
Okay, we'll take a look.
There's probably something coming to 15 that might
How much?
affect the use of
6
funding.
million?
Just take a look at it,
Yeah,
because I think there might be something that would affect your
Yeah,
use of
that
fund
would
balance
help.
transfer.
It's already incorporated into the 6 year.
I'll take a look at it, because I see the revenue line.
There's some right-of-way dollars in there as well.
Good.
Who's the government budget?
Right out here, probably mid-July.
John, on 79 there, attraction, retention of quality employees.
Yes.
We're going to have an interim city manager shortly. And one of the things that I don't want him to have to deal with personally is part-time and temporary employees. I think it would be terrible for him if we lost somebody while he was the interim city manager and had to deal with something like that. Have you been thinking about doing anything that could alleviate that type of an issue in the next 3 months? Have you thought of that at all?
Yes, sir, I have, and there's many employees that I wish we had full-time employees doing the work of essentially part-time employees and consultants. In addition, I'm going to start and finish with Mr. Darling. In addition to Tom Darling being essentially an interim finance director, where that position requires a full-time position, we have essentially a part-time controller. We have essentially a part-time purchasing agent. We have a part-time risk manager. And we have a part-time superintendent of fleet. Now, the finance director, the controller, the risk manager, and the treasurer are all part of the finance division. I've been fortunate to have been a city manager for the city of Troy over 2 tours of duty for over 11 years. I know what's going on in all the departments, and thus could act as an anchor for the financial sector. When I leave, and an interim manager comes in, and then subsequent to that, a full-time manager comes in, that person is not going to have the institutional knowledge of the finances of the city of Troy, and you have, in conjunction with that, senior management at essentially every level of the finance department that can hit the road anytime. I know for a fact that Susan Learstein is going to leave sometime this year. I know that Steve Cooperrider, our risk manager, is trying out to be a referee for NCAA college basketball. I know that Mr. Lamorato doesn't want to hang around too much longer. Well, that's not finance, I'm sorry. But Mr. Francis is a controller who's retired out of Plant Moran. I'm not sure what his plans are. I want to segue back now to Mr. Darling. On more than one occasion, Tom has come to me indicating that he's had an opportunity to either bid or become a client to another organization. And I would like to hire Mr. Darling before I leave. Now, can I do that on my own? Absolutely, the city manager appointment. But I'm concerned about how that would look, walking out the door. And would appreciate the opportunity to discuss that with you, if you don't mind. Sure. If I can discuss this with them openly about bringing you in, because I think it's a good idea to do that. That way, Mr. Darling, who's in charge of the finance division at this point in time, would become an anchor as an employee for the new person that comes in sometime before September 18th, which is 120 days after I resign. I think it's needed for the organization. I really do. The worst that could happen is that, I'm not talking about just me, I'm talking about myself, Darlene, Francis, Susan Learstein, Steve Cooperrider. We're all gone in 4 or 5 months. There is no one to run that division. And Peggy will tell you that we tried to find a controller. We actually solicited 13 people to be a controller for the city of Troy. And all 13 people said thanks, but no thanks. 7 years ago when I was city manager the first time, if there was a rumor of a vacancy, I had people coming to visit me, calling me, can I come to work for you? So yes, Mr. Slater and council, you need a full-time person in all those positions. If I can fill them, I'd be happy to. But I'd like your opinion because, again, I'm leaving.
Well, I'll be first. I mean, I was impressed by Mr. Darling's presentation in the last 2 budget sessions myself, and I've been through many of these. I thought he did a good job, but I've always felt that we should defer to the manager for those decisions, and if you think that that's what should be done, I'm okay with that. I'm concerned that we bring an interim manager in here and we don't have some stability. And if Mr. Darling gets an offer to go somewhere else and leaves, I don't think that's good for the city. So if you support it, I would support it. That's my position.
I would tend to agree. I was taking a look when I was preparing for today and the discussion of the 3-year budget, and we have a list of the personnel summaries for the positions that are budgeted in each of the departments, but I think it should also be known that they're budgeted. They're less than what we've had over the years, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're full as well. And one of my concerns was obviously the finance department. I know you're concerned about the timing, and I think that is important for you to, be aware of the appearance of how things look, but I don't think it would be a major reaction. Obviously, Mr. Darling has had the pleasure of working with us for some time now, and it's very clear that he's able to stand on his own, provide us the answers that we need to these types of questions, and I really do think it's important. We've had many discussions, and there is that concern about getting people to fill those positions, and it's not that we have not been trying to do that. I think that we have the ability here to have someone provide some stability to a very important department, and I think that that's important that we do that, and that we do it with somebody that is coming in with that knowledge base that is going to be important for us to have when we have an interim city manager that has a lot of knowledge about the city of Troy, but hasn't been here in a little while, so they are going to need to be caught up to speed. I think that that's important, and I appreciate you asking for input.
Yeah, this doesn't come as a surprise because we've had the discussion, and I point blank ask you, we talked about it. So, and I appreciate you bringing it to the council, but I've had an opportunity to think about it and my mind around it, and I appreciate the work that Tom's done and would support that move.
Thank you.
I've had 5 minutes to think about it, so I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. I do know that you do need to keep some continuity, and a major change at the top like this certainly could use a shot in the arm. And Tom has proven himself, I think, to this council. His word for sure.
I agree with Councilman Henderson. We've been given 5 minutes' notice, and I admire Mr. Darling, but I don't know that the four of us have the background, and we haven't been approached. I don't know, have you been approached to talk about that on a private
My thought about,
basis? Oh,
my thought about it is, we have a city manager. I appreciate the deference and at least letting us know, but, you know, you're a city manager, you can hire who you please, but I appreciate you reaching out, and I think if this is what you think we need to do as a city, I'm not here to dabble, so.
Thank you.
I agree. We hired to hire you as city manager. That was one of your responsibilities, and I'll lay in at this table if you stand in the way of your decision to put the right person there. I think Mr. Darling would be a great choice.
Thank you much. I probably can't afford them, but.
That's a good spade.
Nice conversation.
And I do have two more things, if I may. One is challenges for the 5-year forecast. And again, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom here. A lot of managers, I think, are standing up around the United States saying this is 2013 they're looking at, and we're looking at 2017. So you're in good stead for the next several years. You have time to address these challenges.
Yes.
And that is, please do, you know, a challenge is do not deplete the unassigned fund balance, because you don't want the city to get that reputation that it can't manage its own finances, because the state will come in and they'll come in with the financial manager if they start to smell that you have deficit budgets for several years in a row.